Hey, Boost Kids. Sorry we didn't have time to read aloud on Friday this week. So what I've decided to do is record chapter 7 and 8. I apologize if you can hear my dog panting in the background. We just got done playing basketball. So we are on chapters 7 and 8 of Red Kayak. So last time we checked in with Brady, he had just rescued Ben from the water, but the nurse asked, or the nurse, the tele-reporter guy, he asked him like, oh, well, what if Brady doesn't get better? What if he has brain damage? And he was like, oh, I don't even want to think about that. So that's where we left off. Oh, also on this background, I took a picture of the Corsica River. So this is the Corsica River, the river that Ben was pulled from, and what the story's kind of centered around. So chapter 7. In the morning, it was nonstop from the minute Dad came back from the 7-Eleven with 3 copies of the Baltimore paper. He spread out the Maryland page on the table so we could see the headline and the story. Boy rescues toddler from river. A 13-year-old Eastern Shore boy alone in his 14-foot skiff plucked a 3-year-old girl from the frigid waters of the Corsica River yesterday afternoon and resuscitated the child while speeding through pelting rain to waiting rescuers. Brady Parks was one of a dozen people, including fire and rescue, law enforcement officials, and watermen, who responded to an emergency call yesterday morning that Virginia D'Angelo, 30, and her young son Benjamin were missing on the river. Virginia D'Angelo is reported in good condition this morning at Eastern General Hospital, while Benjamin, who was flown to the pediatric intensive care unit at Children's Hospital, remains in critical condition. Both suffered from prolonged exposure in waters estimated at 48 degrees yesterday when their kayak overturned. Thomas Parks, a waterman who aided the rescue effort, summoned his son Brady from school. I figured Brady knew these waters as well as anybody, Mr. Parks said. But the younger Parks insisted he could not have done it alone. Part of the credit goes to my dog, Tilly, said Brady, an 8th grader at Alexander Holmes Middle School. She pointed me in the right direction. So on and so forth. The whole story. On the bus, the driver saluted me, and at school, all kinds of people patted me on the shoulder, shook my hand, or gave me a thumbs up. While I was at my locker, Mrs. Owens, the principal, came over and put her arm around my shoulders. Good for you, she said in my ear, embarrassing the heck out of me because I was surrounded by kids who overheard everything she said. I received a call from Channel 13 in Baltimore. They want to come out this afternoon and do an interview. Is it okay with my parents? I asked. It's fine with them. Do you want to do it? I've never been on television before. Lauren Modley hugged her books and stared at me, her eyes doubling in size. Sure, I said, shrugging. Not too long afterward, 8th grade had an assembly in the gym to talk about the upcoming orientation day we were going to have over at the county high school. And at the end of it, Mrs. Owens announced, if you haven't already heard, we have a bona fide hero in our midst this morning, Brady Parks. Everyone in my class stood up and clapped. I know I blushed from head to toe, but man, what I wouldn't give to experience that moment again. It was terrific how everyone at school responded. Everyone except for JT and Digger, that is, my best friends. They didn't come over to wait for the bus with me that morning, and although I spotted them at the assembly, they didn't save me a seat or anything. So I didn't get to talk to them. I never knew what they were thinking. Were they sorry we hadn't called out to Mrs. D'Angelo? Embarrassed because they had cheered on a near tragedy? Just what? What were they thinking? It sort of hurt my feelings that they never sought me out, but I wasn't going to let on that I was miffed. I even had an oxymoron ready for JT when I saw him, and he commented on the rescue. I was going to say, yeah, it was pretty ugly. The other thing was this. Almost the whole time in school, I didn't let myself think anything bad was going to happen to Ben. I was a little swept up in being a hero, I guess. I'd never been one before, and it felt pretty neat. Plus, I was sure that if something was wrong with Ben, the doctors would have known at the hospital by then. Someone would have told me. Still, every once in a while, I couldn't help but think about that reporter's question, and a sick feeling churned in my stomach. I was eager to tell JT about it. I decided I'd say something to him when we were together in social studies class right after lunch, before we took the exam. But by then, everything had been flipped upside down, and I was gone, taken out of school, fast, by my mother. Chapter 8. Brady, I need to talk to you. Mom's voice, so close, startled me. I whirled around from my locker. What in the world? Please, Brady, she said firmly, grabbing my forearm. Outside, I need to talk to you. I was a little stunned. It wasn't like either of my parents to just show up at school the way they had the last 2 days. But I didn't argue. Mom was harried. In fact, her hair wasn't totally dry, and I realized she was wearing the purple sweater she only wears to work, but with a pair of jeans, like she was half dressed. Pushing her way through all the kids in commotion, I followed her to the front entrance. I thought sure someone was going to make a wisecrack, but no one seemed to know it was my mother. If they did, they didn't care. "Way to go, Brady!" one boy down the hall had yelled. When the heavy front doors closed behind us, we looked at each other. It was cold, and neither of us had a jacket. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated and started rubbing her arms to get warm, but then she decided she wasn't going to tell me there on the front steps of the school either. "Let's just get in the car for a minute," she said, heading off toward our Jeep, which was parked at the curb. It's getting weird. We got in the front seat, and my mother pulled her door closed and sighed. It hit me. She had bad news about Ben. Ben was in a coma or something. He did have brain damage. Somehow, they already knew he would never be the same. Instead, Mom turned to me and said, "Ben died." At first, I didn't think I heard right. "What? What did you say?" "Ben is dead, Brady. He died this morning. It was on the news. I thought I'd better get to school before someone told you in the hallway or those television people showed up. But he was alive," I tried to argue. "Carl had a pulse." "I know." She looked down at the steering wheel and nodded. The news threw me off. Slowly, I fell back in my seat and stared straight out the windshield. As I did, the Cloverland dairy truck pulled up and away from where it was backed up to the school for delivery. When it passed in front of us, the smiling black and white cow painted on its side was unavoidable. And in that instant, I thought to myself, Ben is never going to drink any more milk. Stupid, but that was my first thought. Ben would never drink another cup of milk from that little spout cups of his. I felt my mother's hand touch mine. "I'm so sorry, Brady," she said. "I know this is going to be hard for you." "Why?" I demanded, turning to her. "Why did he die?" Mom's eyes shone. I could see she'd been crying, and I figured this hurt her too, because it was a little like when we lost Amanda. "I don't know," she replied. When I blinked, a tear ran down her cheek. "I guess he was in that cold water for too long." I felt my own eyes fill up. "Shoot," I exclaimed, kicking at the Kleenex box on the floor. "I should have gotten there faster." "No, Brady." Mom tried to grab my hand, but I pulled it away to put it up over my face. "It's not your fault, and don't you dare blame yourself. You tried, Brady. You did everything you could. But if you hadn't found him and done what you did, he wouldn't have had any chance. At least you gave him that." Did I? Did I do everything I could? An enormous hole opened up in my chest. I took in a huge gulp of air and held it for a moment, and then I grew still. When I took my hands away from my eyes, I saw the dairy truck disappear down the highway and watched the noisy sixth graders run out onto the field for gym. If we talked any more, I can't remember. All I know is Mom said, "Let's go home," and we did. For a while, I sat at the kitchen table, numb, while Mom called school and made sure the television interview had been canceled. Then I moved into my room and sat at the end of my bed, staring at the floor. I started thinking that the only thing I wanted to do was go out and find that red kayak and bring it in. It seemed like a small, insignificant thing. The D'Angelos probably would never want to see it again, but it's all I could think of doing. So I changed into grubby jeans and reached for my hat, my Baltimore Orioles cap, but then I thought, no, this is the hat that Ben wore just before he died. Not that I'm superstitious, but I didn't feel right about it. I set it down on my bureau and took another instead, then grabbed one of Dad's winter coats because both mine were now gone, one in the ambulance with Ben and the other one at school, and headed down to the dock. Tilly followed at my heels. She wanted to come in the worst way, but I wouldn't let her in the boat. I don't know why. "Go on," I hollered at her when she barked and tried to hop in after I undid the lines. I motored straight to the spot in the cove where I'd found Ben, cut off the engine, and let the boat drift. I was trying real hard not to think of how I messed up, how I could have called out a warning when we first saw them, but even if I had yelled, would Mrs. D'Angelo have heard me? And if she had, would she have listened? Who knows? I should have tried, though. At least then she would have been alerted to the danger, and maybe she would have come back before it was too late. Or maybe I could have found Ben earlier. I just think if I had gone up to that other creek first, if I'd gotten there 5 minutes sooner. The fact that I went from being a hero to a great big nothing in just a few hours didn't bother me. The other stuff was too big. The water was calm, solid brown because of how the rain had stirred everything up the day before. You could still smell the storm, the wet logs, the damp grass, the muddy riverbank. Knew I would never find that kayak. Most likely it had gone out to the tide and floated downriver. Either that or it washed up shore somewhere along Bay's shore, maybe even far south as Bay Bridge. My kayak was pretty hard to sink, but it would turn up eventually. But what would it matter? And what was I going to do with it anyways? Usually being out on the water made me feel free. Whenever things at school bothered me, I went out on the water to shake it off. But that day all it did was make me sick to my stomach. I noticed how, nearby, the roots to a big sweet gum tree exposed by erosion in the riverbank suddenly looked like a swarm of snakes slithering into the water. Just then the eagle flew overhead and split the air in half with his terrible screech. It made me jump so loud. You hardly ever saw the eagle. A pair of them lived nearby, let alone heard one, but I figured it was yelling at me. It saw everything that happened in the river yesterday, and it was letting me know. Unfair, I thought. My teeth clenched, and a tremendous surge of anger burst out of me. You didn't have to kill him! I screamed at the river. My voice echoed in that hollow that surrounded the quiet cove. Kill him, kill him, kill him. You didn't have to be so cold, I accused, but the anger was gone, turned into something else already. You didn't have to make Ben die, I muttered before I began to cry. Some people, I guess, they'd be railing at God for letting a thing like that happen. But me, I cussed out the river. And you know what? Nothing happened. When I finished crying, there wasn't a sound to be heard except the gentlest lap of waves on the nearby sandbar. The river didn't care. A strange, chilly feeling settled around me then, like an invisible fog. What was it going to do? And whatever compelled me to look down, I'll never know, but the truth is this. When I leaned over to peer into the river, and the water was not brown and full of sediment, but perfectly clear, and at the bottom, a few feet down, I could see a red kayak. So that is our reading for today. Again, that is chapters 7 and 8. If you would like to, we're going to post the next one, chapter 9, tomorrow. So when you guys come back, we can move on to chapter 10. Thank you.